Hello everybody, it's me again, after another long hiatus. Who's surprised? Not me. Bit of a different video today. As you can see from the title, we're going to be discussing one of the boogeymen in the meta right now, and his effect on the game. What does he mean for Armada? What's going on? He's one of the, if you're in any of the big Armada discords or in any of the big Armada communities, you've probably seen a lot of discussion about Anakin and about other things like Onagers and stuff like that. But Anakin has commanded a lot of attention recently, and that's for good reason. I am making this video and going to talk about a tournament I just played in because of some Armada content that was put out by Armada content creators who I very much respect and who I consider friends in the community. Who they put out a while back some thoughts and some opinions on Anakin that I didn't really just agree with at all. And it seemed like there was a good amount of the community that didn't agree with them either, and I wanted to offer maybe a different perspective that, for some people is going to be, it's going to come off as like a bit of a rebuttal. For some people, it's not what you agree with, and I absolutely respect that. But I think for a lot of other people, it may be putting into words some of what you've been feeling and some of the attitudes you've been seeing in the community. So I want to do a deep dive into that kind of thing. But before I go any further, I just want to say, Anakin or no Anakin, Onager or no Onager, no matter what, this is a truly beautiful game. Armada is a really incredible game. I've never played anything that has hooked me the same way it has. I mean, I've played this game for almost 6 years now, and I'm still not tired of it. I go through seasons of playing it more and less, but this is just such an incredible game, and I don't want any negativity or any criticism of the game or anything to dissuade people from trying it and continuing to play it, because it really is an awesome game. There are balance problems with it, absolutely, and AMG is just a horrible company who are not supporting it in the way it deserves to be supported. But despite that, it is still such an awesome game, and I'm still optimistic of the future of the game. I'm still optimistic of ways that the community can keep this game going and continue to support it. I'm looking forward to Worlds and all the upcoming tournaments. So I don't want my video here or any other criticism of Anakin or of AMG or of anything like that to take away from people's enjoyment of this game, because it just is an awesome game. The other thing I'll preface this with is that for casual players, you can ignore a lot of what I'm saying in this video, because the beauty of casual play, if you're playing with your friends at your friendly local game store every once in a while, or playing on the kitchen table with friends and family, you can largely ignore a lot of the stuff you don't like. For example, if you think Anakin is too strong or he is unfun for you, you could either, gentleman's out of it with your opponent, like, hey, let's neither of us play him because we don't enjoy him, or we've agreed on a different way to play Anakin. We've changed his text, we've changed the way he interacts with stuff, so it's more fun for us in our casual environment. And that's awesome. That's some of the great parts about casual play, is you've been given this structure of this incredible game with these really nice looking game pieces, but ultimately, between you and your friends, you can play it however you want to play it. What I'm mainly focusing on is tournaments and competitive play, with a special focus on your store champ level tournaments and your smaller regional tournaments, because that's where I think Anakin is a problem for Armada, and so is the Onager, and so are a couple other things, but I will get to those. So like I said at the top, my reason for making this video is kind of to provide a different perspective and a different opinion than what was expressed in some other Armada content a little while back. And again, those content creators are some people I genuinely consider friends in this community. They're people I have a great amount of respect for. And so this is not like an attack or a rebuttal or anything like that. This is just me as another content creator sharing my experiences with Anakin and my opinions on the whole thing. So to start off with, I want to share the results of a tournament that I went to recently. Let me get back to this. So I attended this recent Store Championships of the World's invite at our local game store in Carmel. As some of you may know, I host these tournaments pretty frequently. About once every few months or so, I try to host one, just because there's really not a whole lot of other tournaments being hosted in the Midwest right now, and AMG dropped the ball on Gen Con, so people are hungry for tournaments. And so I've been doing these every few months, and this time we had a Worlds invite on the line, and so my friend Luke was gracious enough to volunteer to be the judge on the day. So while I organized the tournament and everything, I got to hand things over to him on tournament day. He ran all the pairings, made all the judge calls and everything, and I just got to actually play and enjoy the tournament. And as you can see, I ended up winning the tournament by a pretty decent margin there. And originally, I was going to play Akbar. I had a list that I was really enjoying, that I thought was a lot of fun, that I had been practicing for a little while. And then when this piece of content came out with these opinions on Anakin, I really disagreed with them, and I decided to pivot last second and play Anakin in this tournament to try to prove a point. And I think I did prove that point, or at least I accomplished what I wanted to do. I got a Worlds invite out of it too, so there's that. I'll look forward to that in March. But the main thing I wanted to do was to try and back up my opinions and my thoughts on him, either confirming them for myself or, having people beat me and prove to me that, you know what, I was actually wrong about Anakin, and learn that way. And so in this case, the former happened. Without going too much into it, I played a list that I called All the Bullshit, because it includes all of the stuff that I think the Republic has access to that is overtuned, that is too strong. And that includes Anakin, Mercy Mission, Tranquility, and Matchstick. So this is the list. Just do a quick once-over. You can pause if you want. It's not necessarily something I'd seen other people run, but in my very limited 2 or 3 weeks of testing, this is what I settled on as a good way to prove my point. So, what's the Anakin problem? And that phrase, the Anakin problem, is going to encompass a couple things, but let's start with the man himself. So, as I'm sure you know, Anakin was released in Rapid Reinforcements 2, which was a print-and-play expansion from AMG that came out a little bit after Worlds, that I don't think was tested by anyone who has ever played Armada in any capacity, if I had to guess, because there was a lot of stuff that was just broken and didn't work right and had to have a bunch of rulings in it. And Anakin is kind of the poster child of Rapid Reinforcements 2. He's the big boogeyman. I don't think he's the strongest thing to come out of Rapid Reinforcements 2. I'll get to that a little bit later, but he is the thing everyone is talking about and everyone was concerned about. So what it boiled down to is AMG said Anakin can add 1 die to every salvo he does. He can also spend salvos while he's attacking with his activation to perform an extra attack, which can be a 3rd attack if you've already gotten a double arc. So already he's outputting a whole lot more damage than you would expect him to. And then they also said you can salvo, and then you can salvo again when you are attacked. You can hit him with the old double salvo, the 1-2. Oh, and by the way, you have access to DBY-827 heavy turbo lasers, among other things. And so your double salvo tends to do around 10 to 12 damage every time, which is a lot. And so the problem that Anakin has created is that he has, I won't say broken, he has very, very strongly bent and almost broken a core aspect of this game, which is ships taking turns firing at each other. Just like the Onager kind of broke things, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But salvo has been in the game since 1.5, or even before that, I think, with like the Onager and Starhawk when those came out. And I think salvo is an awesome mechanic. It really made people have to think in this, strategy game, which is a good thing. Back in the day, if you had a shot, you took a shot. Now, salvo kind of changes the math on that, and you had to be a bit more strategic in when you were shooting and when you were not shooting, what you were using your accuracies on, etc. So I think salvo is an awesome mechanic, but Anakin just really pushes that past where I think it's okay. Before Anakin, you attack your average Republic Venator, and it salvos you for about 3 or 4 damage, depending if it had DBYs or not, which is respectable, but you were probably dealing more damage to the Venator than it was dealing to you. Now that same shot, you shoot the Venator, and it spends a salvo and hits you for 5 or 6, and then it spends another salvo before you have time to react and hits you for another 5 or 6 in the same hull zone. On your activation, so now you've just taken 10 to 12 damage on your own activation, not to mention the fact that on its own activation, that Venator can triple tap you for presumably, I don't know, 10, 15, 18 damage, depending on rolls. And so he has changed the math and changed the considerations on shots to such a degree that a lot of times the best course of action is just to not play the game. The best course of action is just to ignore his ships, knowing that you will take more damage from him than you will do back to him, and you just run away. That's the sad reality for a lot of fleets. The problem is, the Republic is not a faction of Starhawks that are all stuck at speed 2. Anakin can actually chase you, and his little buddy Matchstick that came in Rapid Reinforcements 2 just, takes that up another level of not only can he chase you, he can send a whole squad wing of 10-point rogue bombers after you that he doesn't have to command ever, and those can just eat you alive. And so, if Anakin existed in a vacuum, he'd be strong, but he'd be a bit more manageable, but he doesn't exist in a vacuum. He exists in a faction that has access to arguably the single strongest offensive tech card in the entire game in Tranquility, a card that was already overtuned. That wasn't really a problem because the power level of the Republic wasn't as high. Now that the Republic is everywhere and is winning and getting top 4s everywhere, suddenly the power of this card is becoming a bit more obvious to people. I have always hated this card, I'll be straight up, so you can take my opinions with a grain of salt, because I really hate this card. It's just too efficient for what it does. One of the big things of this game is getting maximum use out of all your shields and like all your defensive resources, making it harder for your opponent to take you down. And the fact that Tranquility is an unlimited number of somewhat conditional uses of all of your shields in your entire ship makes it so strong, especially for 3 points. I could do a whole video about this card. But needless to say, it's overtuned and lets Anakin ships live longer than they should. Republic also has access to this card, Emergency Mission, which is the only card in the game that gives you quote-unquote free points outside of an objective or kill points. In a lot of games, particularly with a skilled player, this is just a free 40 points. Almost every time, it's 40 points for free. And that can easily make a loss into a win. It can make a 6-5 tie where you don't fight each other into a solid 6-5 win for the Anakin player. It can bump you up a whole tier of scoring. And that ability to have a way to affect the game state if neither player wants to engage is so strong in the faction that wants you to engage into it. And then, we've already touched on him, but Matchstick is probably the strongest thing to come out of Rapid Reinforcements 2. I have some data I want to get to here in a couple seconds, but Matchstick is one of, if not the most efficient squad in the game right now. 14 points for Double Brace, with the potential to give basically unlimited rogue over and over and over to your already efficient 10-point Gar Y-Wings. Matchstick is very, very, very strong, and is just more evidence that maybe Rapid Reinforcements wasn't super well thought out. Who knows? But let me get to a little bit of data here. I went back and I looked at the last 10 world qualifying tournaments that had a list of data available on T4. This included stuff like this recent Indie Store Champs that I just played in, the London GT, Golden State Games, the 2 recent Texas tournaments that constituted Warzone. Each had 16 players, each gave out a Worlds invite. We have a Polish store champion there. We have Nova. We have the Salt Lake Open, which my good friend Taserface won. We have LSO, and we have SCO as well. So we have a good mix of world qualifying tournaments from the last few months or so. And I went and I looked at what lists made the top 4. How does one determine success of a list? I would say if there are trends of stuff making top 4, then that probably means it's good in a variety of players' hands. And so that's what I looked at. What lists made top 4? I just looked at faction data, really. I came out with 15 Imperial lists made top 4 out of those 10 tournaments, 8 Rebels, 15 Republic, and 2 CIS. Well, that by itself doesn't mean a ton, because what was the play rate compared to the top 4 rate? Well, the Empires, it was 15 out of 98 total entrants made top 4 with Empire, and that was just over 15%. Rebels, it was 8 out of 63, which is about 12.5%. So, a non-zero amount lower than the Empire, but still quite a popular faction. I'm going to jump over GAR real quick. CIS was 2 out of 27, which was just under 7.5%, which was far and away the lowest play rate and the lowest top 4 rate. So maybe that's a topic for another video, the problem CIS is having right now. And the Republic was 15 out of 44, which was a whopping 34% top 4 rate. That, to me, is absolutely absurd for 2 reasons. Number one, Republic used to be the least played faction in the game. There were only 5 people, I think, who took Republic to Worlds, if I remember correctly. And before that, Republic was popping up in the 2 to 3 players range at each tournament. It was not very well played and not very well represented, and it didn't do particularly well at tournaments. It was a really big deal when Unskilled First Officer won the Vassal World Cup and then got second at Worlds. That was like the Republic's first really huge results that it got. Well, now, in these last 10 tournaments, Republic is the best thing you can be playing right now statistically. 34% top 4 rate is more than double the next closest, which would be Empire. It's still the third most played, second least played, I guess. Only 44 plays in these 10 tournaments, but a 34% top 4 rate is ridiculous. Most of those lists were running Matchstick. And you might say to yourself, okay, well, Matchstick's not the subject of the video. Matchstick's not the boogeyman. But it's less of, Matchstick is too strong, which he is. And more of, the Republic already had all of these good tools with stuff like Tranquility and Mercy Mission and a couple other things, which we don't have time to get into today. Adding on Anakin and Matchstick has really changed the direction of the faction, and it now has made it one of the best things you can be playing. Now, I want to reference some things that came up around the time of the Armada podcast that mentioned that Anakin was maybe not a huge issue. It was the fact that at that time, which I think was a little over a month ago, maybe a little under a month, I don't remember. It was around when Nova was happening, was when the podcast came out. It was the fact that Anakin hadn't really been posting results. And frankly, Republic hadn't been posting a ton of results at that time either. And since that point, stuff has just exploded. We have started to see Anakin show up in a lot of top 4s. Anakin has won 2 tournaments since that time, both the one I just won in Indianapolis as well as one in Canada. And in that Canadian tournament, the whole top 3 were Anakin, and I believe it was either 4 or all 5 of the top 5 were running Republic, and almost all of those were, or at least many of those were with Matchstick. So the point of, well, he's not winning anything is kind of starting to go away, because we are starting to see Anakin do better and better in events as opposed to worse and worse, which you would think would be the case as people figured him out. But it seems like the inverse is happening right now, is as more and more people pick him up, namely as more and more good players start playing Anakin and learning how to fly him instead of just 3 Venators on the table going towards your opponent, we're starting to see Anakin get better and better results. Now, I want to touch on this now so I don't forget to do it later. Anakin absolutely has counters. There is no question about that. Anakin is hard countered by a few things in this game. Some of his best counters are the Onager, Sloane to strip his tokens, stuff like Officer Palpatine to spend his tokens when he attacks. That can exert a ton of pressure on Anakin. Good boarding trooper platforms are very effective. Overload Pulse, still very situational, but better than it used to be, I guess. And then stuff like, really heavy squad balls to wipe out any protective squads that Annie has and start going after his ships properly. And accuracy tech, the ability to reliably get 2 accuracies, 2 to 3 is really what you want, but I'm going to get to that in a minute here. But astute listeners will realize that, hang on, there's only one faction that reliably has a lot of that stuff, and that's the Empire. And namely, that's the Onager. And stuff like Price and Jonas and Officer Palpatine and Sloane, all that stuff. That's one faction. And the Onager was already probably the best thing you could be running, as evidenced by Worlds, where it showed up in force and dominated the tournament to a large extent. And now, with Anakin in the meta, that's even more prevalent. If Anakin is the boogeyman and the Onager is already one of the best things in the game, why not just run the Onager even more? And so that's what we've seen. If you look at a lot of the tournament lists, you're seeing almost every Republic list is either Annie and or Matchstick, and most Empire lists feature Onagers. There was just at the Lungeon GT, there were a ton of Onagers there. I think it was something like 3 or 4 Onagers in top 4. And so that was already a ship that was causing some problems, that was creating some negative play experiences, that people had problems with. And now you have thrust it even further into the meta because it is one of the only things that reliably checks Anakin, who was also himself creating negative play experiences because people are rolling 3 or 5 damage against him and then they're getting blown up for 12. And so the point of this video, which I know I'm getting to a little late here, sorry about that. The point of this video is that a combination of Anakin and the Onager are boxing out too many options in the game. They are restricting list building too much. There, in my opinion, is a line between trying to prepare for, the big meta threats, trying to have answers for those, and having to build only what can beat those things. Like I said, there are plenty of counters to Anakin. Heck, flying away from him is a decent enough counter in some cases. But if the best solution for a lot of lists is to not fight him, to not roll dice, to not play the game, is that good for the game? The same discussion came up with Farmhawk. Farmhawk would create a lot of non-games because to win with Farmhawk, you didn't really have to interact with your opponent. And Anakin is creating a similar thing where he creates a lot of non-games because this just can't fight him because he puts out just too much damage. And I don't think that's good for the game. I think that is a problem. I think that there are some people in this game who love the challenge of figuring out a new thing that they have to beat, figuring out a puzzle. Anakin's just another puzzle to build around, learn how to adjust to, etc. Or there's a lot of people who think Anakin's not an issue because they were already playing stuff that was good into him. Playing a lot of Onagers, playing a lot of Sloan, they're like, I don't really see what the big deal is. I have no problem beating him myself. But I think that tends to minimize the concerns of people at the store champs level, at the small regional level, who don't want to play Onagers. They want to play with the faction that they own. They maybe only get a couple tournaments they can go to locally a year, and they are excited to play with this tech that they've developed for their own list, whether that's like MSU or really any CIS list or anything right now. And then they show up and they get kicked in the teeth by Anakin, or they have to fly away from him. And that just creates such unfun experiences. I think it was Truthiness, who is, for those of you who don't know, is a top player, a very well-respected player in the community, who at Nova had no problem beating Anakin with his list. And afterwards he said, I didn't have a problem beating him. I won my games against him, but I didn't have any enjoyment in that. It's the things that Anakin forces you to do or not do, and the ways he forces you to list build, for a lot of people are just not fun. And if you're going to a tournament nowadays, you can't afford not to have answers for Anakin and the Onager. And those two combined just force out so many things in the game. I think a lot of the reason that the CIS is really struggling right now, when they weren't struggling before Worlds, is the fact that the Onagers have become more prevalent and the fact that Annie exists. And there were ways for the CIS to beat Onagers. Thermal Shields was a great option. Flanking with a really fast Patriot's Fist that has an insanely good nav chart was a pretty good option. Passing shields, Wat Tambor, all that kind of stuff. But now that same stuff doesn't work against Anakin, and it is very, very hard for factions like the CIS and a lot of archetypes in other factions to be able to comfortably plan for both. There is really no problem with there's always going to be a strongest thing in the game that you have to plan for, but when you have to plan for these two things that fundamentally break the game in different ways, now you're really starting to box out a lot of options, which is such a shame, because Armada list building has like endless creativity. It's one of my favorite parts of the game. It's one of a lot of people's favorite parts of the game. Is there are so many options that you can throw into a list to do so many different things. There's so much diversity, and Anakin is another layer with the Onager and a couple other things that you've always had to worry about. It's just another layer that you have to plan for. It's another thing that restricts your list building even that little bit more, and that's really starting to cramp for some people. It's frustrating a lot of players at the local and small store champ, small regional level, is that they don't get a ton of time to play competitively, and when they do, they're having to play against this bullshit. They can't enjoy the game because things like Anakin and Onagers and stuff are running around, and so that's a lot of doom and gloom. That's the Anakin problem in my mind. It's the fact that Anakin not only himself is so strong, but exists in a game, in a faction that has a lot of other things that enable him even more with Mercy Mission, Tranquility, Matchstick, etc. And he exists in a game where there are other boogeymen you're already having to prepare for. So, what would the solution be? I would be heavily in favor of some sort of reworking of Anakin, whether that would be getting rid of the double salvo and or the triple tap on offense, or you're reining him in somewhat. I don't know that a points increase fixes him. You just cut a couple things. Like from this list, I have plenty of stuff I could cut if he went up 5, 6, 7 points, and this list would still be just as effective, basically. So I think some sort of rework would be needed. Whether or not AMG even cares enough about Armada to do that, who knows? But I know that a lot of the community cares, and so I'm hopeful that there's a solution for this down the line. Whether that's something TOs agree on, or there's some sort of community effort, or just events that don't include Anakin or change Anakin in some way. Who knows? All that to say, he's probably not going to dominate Worlds. Like, a lot of the top players are already playing Onagers and stuff like that, and at Worlds is a tournament where you're a bit more okay running away and taking the 5-6 or however it goes, because you just go on to your other games. So I don't think he'll be as big of an issue in that sense. However, I think for where more people are, which is at that local level, at your store champs, your small regionals, etc., that's where his impact is being felt. That's where people are getting upset and getting discouraged, and that's a very real thing. That's a very real problem. I think that to say that he's just another layer that you have to think about is kind of minimizing the issue that he really does present, and the fact that he seems to only be putting up better and better results, and that Gar just seems to be dominating more and more as a whole, makes me think that maybe he's a bigger issue than some people thought he would be. There's always going to be, like I said earlier, if you were already playing stuff like Slonager, Sloan with an Onager, you're laughing now, because you have no problem playing against Anakin. Anakin is like your dream matchup. But for a lot of MSU players and just general CIS players and people who wanted to play other stuff that wasn't Onagers and wasn't Sloan, it wasn't even like the Empire, some of those people are feeling the hurt now. And that's what I wanted to prove with my tournament run recently that I did. That's what I want to go over with this video. Just that Anakin is not necessarily like other stuff we've seen. He's more similar to something like the Onager than he is to something like the Starhawk or to the SSD or something, where if you didn't know what you were doing, you'd get clapped, but if you came in with a plan, you'd be okay. There are just so many fewer things that deal well with Anakin and with Onagers, and that really restricts list building, and I think that that's a really, really sad and a real problem for the game. So anyway, that's video for today. I'm hoping to do some other content soon that's more positive and stuff, and again, I don't want this to just shower more doom and gloom on things. It's the discussions of Anakin have played out to death in a lot of the discords, and I just wanted to make this video after having played him at this recent store championship. I don't think I'm ever going to pick him up again. He just is not fun to play. I don't enjoy making my opponents feel bad like he makes them feel bad. I want to be a positive force in my community, and so I'm hoping that just by getting this kind of getting my point across here. I'm feeling like I've made my point about him. Maybe that those who think he's not a problem would be maybe a bit more receptive to those who do think he's a problem. Understand maybe where they're coming from, and that he's genuinely is impacting them, and they're not just sad 'cause bad kind of thing. They don't just need to adapt. That's I think I don't know, a bit ignorant, bit naive, but ultimately it is just still a beautiful game. This is still something that I'm glad that we can still continue to enjoy, even though there are boogeymen out there. If people would like to see perhaps a video about tactics to use against Anakin, good tech options, or all that kind of thing, just let me know. I'm happy to try to do that. May not get it out to you for another year or so, depending on my rate of videos, but I'm happy to look at doing something like that. I know I've broken my promise. I said next video I posted was going to be the Imperial Squadron tier list, so I apologize to people who were looking for that. I will try to get that done at some point. I am, life happens. Things happen. I get busy. But I will try to have that out for those of you who want it at some point in the near future. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching. Keep playing this beautiful, amazing game. Feel free to sound off in the comments if you think I'm a total idiot. But I appreciate your view nonetheless. I'll catch you guys later. Bye-bye.